Welcome to the session. Today, I'm going to talk about caching in Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So this is the agenda for today. I'll give you a background around caching and Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Then we'll talk about the cache configuration in MGT Components. I will show you the syntax and the way, the granularity of cache and how it can be implemented. Then we'll have a cool demo to optimize graph queries in React and JavaScript application. And I'll also show you some resources. So let's get started. So we'll start with an example. Assume that you want to display information about a person in your app. To show this information, you would need to call Microsoft Graph 3 times. First, you would retrieve the information about the person, then their picture, and then finally their presence. Now, let's say you want to show this information not for one person, but for 5 people. Your app will need to run 15 requests. If you need to show the information about users in multiple places in your app, for example, showing messages, file authors, meeting attendees, you might issue calls for data that has already been retrieved. To address this, we have the Microsoft Graph components. So Microsoft Graph Toolkit is a collection of reusable and framework agnostic web components and helpers for accessing and working with Microsoft Graphs. These components are extensible and customizable with templating and CSS custom properties. The MGT components provide access to popular Microsoft 365 datasets with the power of Microsoft Graph API. You can see on your screen, these are the different components which helps us to retrieve the information. I have earlier posted detailed videos about Microsoft Graph and basics of Microsoft Graph Toolkit. You can check those videos if you would like to know the details about this, about the MGTs and Microsoft Graph. I've provided the link in the description. Now coming back, while an application's functionality is very important, users equally value the non-functional areas of the application, such as performance, usability, accessibility, and UI. As per the research, it is observed that users are not willing to wait for more than 3 seconds for a page to load. A common challenge in modern applications is dealing with times of spikes in application usage. You must have seen in your professional career where the applications are implemented, and some of the examples like accessing the company's intranet information during an appraisal cycle, or when a company announcement is done, and so on and so forth. To these performance issues, caching is an option which really helps. So let's explore how caching can be implemented using MGT components. So let's see how the cache configuration is done. So cache settings are exposed through cache service class. You can control the cache globally, but also override the configuration for a specific workload if necessary. So duration of cache is managed by default invalidation period. So this is the property which is used to manage the cache. By default, it is 60 minutes, that is 1 hour. But it for present store, it is different. It is refreshed every 5 minutes. So it always makes more sense when to see these things in action. So first we'll see the syntax, and then we'll see the demo of how it is implemented. So the syntax is like this, where you can use the cache service class and then enable or disable the configuration. If you want to disable, you need to set the value as false, and the enable you can enable it by setting it true. If you want to set the default invalidation period, you can modify that. By default, as I said, it is 1 hour, but it can be changed. Here it is mentioned as a half an hour. To disable the specific workload, say you have people, or what the agenda or users, or that kind of cache which you are which you want to get disabled, or you don't want those details to be cached, you can definitely set that as false. And there might be business cases where you want to flush out the entire cache. Okay, so you can do that using cache service dot clear cache. So as I said, it always makes more sense to see this, instead of hearing, we can do that in action, see it in action, and then so let's see it in demo. First, application. First, we will see the demo of the React application, and then we'll also see how it is implemented in JavaScript. So this is a React application. I'll show you how it is implemented. So when a call is made, you can see that there are multiple calls made to display the agenda as well as the people. See in the actual code, the way it is implemented is I have 3 components, and this is how we enable or disable the cache. Now it is set to true, that is the cache is enabled. And if I go back and refresh the page, you can see that now the multiple calls are not made. Okay, every time I refresh the page, it is gonna use the cached version. The databases are created for MGT and they are prefixed as MGT dash. The data for each entity is stored in a separate object store. Here you can see it as MGT people, MGT photos, MGT users for the information which is displayed. And every time I refresh the screen, you are going to see that it is not creating, or it is rather not making any calls, additional calls. Now let me go back and change the setting to false. Now, when I refresh the page, it is making, instead of 2 calls, it is making 4 calls. And every time I refresh the screen, it is going to make 4 calls. So this is how you can enable or disable the cache. As I said that this is where you can also control it. See, now it is set for people for a specific workload. You can do that, or you can do that you can do it globally. You can set it globally as false, and you will see the number of calls which are made will increase. Okay, because it is making call. It was not first making calls. The cache was disabled only for people control. Now it is disabled for the entire. Like globally, we have done it for the, we have set it globally. I'll reverse that. And you can also see after this that the number of calls will decrease. Now coming back to the JavaScript application, this is how it is done in the JavaScript. Here, similar to what we have observed in the React application, here it is MGT cache service config is enable is true. So true has enabled that the caching is enabled. I'll just go back to the application and log in. You can see the number of calls it is made to display the people component. Now it is set to false. Every time I refresh it, I think it is. Yeah, it is set to true, and every time I refresh it, it is gonna make calls lesser than what it makes. Okay, let me go back and disable this. And we have, every time I refresh the page, there will be additional calls made. So this is how the caching is implemented in Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So to summarize, MGT Components Cache can help to significantly improve the latency and throughput. Increased load on the Microsoft calls result in higher latencies to get data, making the overall application performance unpredictable. An effective caching strategy is perhaps the single biggest factor in creating an app that performs well at scale. Properly leveraging caching can result in an application that not only performs better, but also costs less at scale. So these are some of the resources which I have referred. And if you want to get into detail, you can refer these resources. I hope this session was helpful to understand the caching in Microsoft Graph Toolkit. If you have any questions or queries, post them into the description and I'll make sure that I address those comments. Thank you for joining.